All right. My name is Ron Dixon, and I'm conducting this interview on behalf of Greensboro Elks Lodge in Greensboro, North Carolina, also on behalf of the National Veterans History Project. Today is September the 10th, 2011. Would you please state your name?
Larry Blair Bourquin.
And Larry, also state your date of birth and where you were born.
I was born July 25th, 1933, Wauseon, Ohio, the county seat, but my parents' home was in Archbold, Ohio.
Okay. And that brings to the next question, if you would also state your parents' names.
My father was Charles Bourquin and my mother was Edna Trout Bourquin.
Okay. And also, for some other family, you have brothers and sisters?
I have 1.5 sisters.
And their name? Put you on the spot here.
The oldest is Lynn. She's a child of my parents. And my half-sister is Janet, and she is a daughter of my mother and her second marriage.
Okay. All right, you were born in 1933 in Wauseon, Ohio. What was it like growing up there?
Well, I was growing up in Archbold. That was our home. And
Typical
it was
boy.
small town, in small town atmosphere, pretty much. Everybody knew one another. And World War II came along, and my parents separated partly due to that war, and partly because of their own problems. And I went to live with my grandparents, my mother's parents, and my sister lived with my mother in Toledo. My grandfather owned a farm outside of Archbold, Ohio. And I lived there from the time I was, I believe, 9 years old until I went to the Navy at 19 years old.
All right. Now, you were born in 33, so you were living during what was called the Great Depression, but you certainly don't have any memory very much of those years, do you?
Not much. My grandfather was a township trustee, and I remember people coming to him for help during the Depression. They looked to him as a leader in the community partly because he was a trustee, and also they thought they could get some help from him with food and finances and so forth, because he had a good reputation.
Okay. And if I'm doing my math correctly, you graduated high school around 1951?
Yes, that's right.
51. You went into the Navy in November of 52. Did you go to college any there between?
Not
Or did
then.
you just go to work after
I worked
high
on
school?
a farm, my grandfather's farm, and I picked up part-time jobs.
Okay. So after high school, you worked for a while, and in 1952, November, how did you decide you were going to join the Navy? Why the Navy?
Well, I had an uncle, one of my grandparents' sons, who had worked in Panama for about 9 years, and he came home and stayed with his parents, my grandparents, and we talked a lot while he was there, and worked together, like shoveling corn, and I was eager to get away from there and see something else and do something else. And lots of people my age were being drafted, so I thought I would join the Navy, primarily on what he said. And away I went.
Navy it was,
Mhm.
as opposed to Marines, Army, or Air Force.
Well, it was mostly a land war in Korea, and I didn't particularly want to get in the war, but I did want to get on my current situation.
Was that always kind of in the back of your mind there while you were in the Navy? What was going on in Korea?
Oh, yes. Everybody's, I think.
Yeah. So you go in November '52, and you told me you do your basic training at Great Lakes, Illinois. Now that had to be cold.
It was.
The entire
That's what I
time.
remember most about boot camp.
Yeah. Yeah. How long is the boot camp for the Navy?
I think ours was back then 12 weeks, but it's been reduced from that to, I don't know, maybe 8 or 10 weeks.
So your 12 weeks covered the end of November of '52 until probably, did your basic training end up around the end of February of '53? Somewhere in that neighborhood?
I suppose so, yeah.
Yeah. Did you get to come home on leave for like Christmas time?
No,
During
not when I was in boot camp.
They wouldn't let you come home at all. Huh?
No leave during Christmas or Thanksgiving.
Yeah. So you were a young guy when you did your basic training.
Yes.
Was that pretty easy for you?
I didn't have any problems.
Youth takes care of a lot of those things, right?
Yes, it does.
So you do your 12 weeks. You're into through February of '53. Did you have any kind of? Were you part of the decision process at all as far as your next duty station and what your next training was going to be?
Not from boot camp, I wasn't.
Because you had to take the aptitude test and things like that, right?
Well, I suppose I did, but I don't know how much effect they had on where I was stationed.
All right. So where did they send you after Great Lakes?
To the aircraft carrier Cabot.
So you went straight to the carrier.
Mm.
That had to be a lot of training before you could do your job, wasn't it?
Well, yeah, they saw that when I got on the carrier.
Mhm.
I didn't know anything about electronics, and they sent me back to Great Lakes to go to electronics school in.
Back to Great Lakes?
Back to Great Lakes.
Okay.
And,
So how long did you stay on the carrier before they sent you back to Great
oh,
Lakes?
I don't know, month or 6 weeks perhaps.
Okay.
And I was in electronics school, and then I went back to the carrier when I was done there.
So you went to the carrier, back to Great Lakes, and then finished the Great Lakes again and back to the carrier.
Yeah.
Now, what time frame are we now? Are we midway through '53, or when you go back to the carrier?
I suppose it was later than that.
Later.
Yeah. It was probably late '53, early '54.
And the training that you took to go back and serve on the carrier, was that a relatively easy process again for you, or was it?
No, I
study
had
hard?
to study pretty hard. They really threw a lot of information very fast at us. And I have to admit, I didn't do well in that school, but
You must have done
I
well
did learn a
enough.
lot.
You must have done well enough that they trusted you aboard the ship, right?
Well, that doesn't take much.
So you, after going back to the carrier, now where was the carrier located?
Well, when I met up with it after boot camp, it was in the Caribbean, and I went to Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. I think I flew down there, and the carrier was operating out of there on training.
Mm-hmm.
And then it came back to its home port, which was Quonset Point, Rhode Island, Naval Air Station. And we operated out of there for a while. And anyhow, we weren't going anywhere really to speak of, and that's one reason why I joined the Navy, to see the world.
Yeah.
And, you know, and what I see, I saw the sea.
Yeah.
But I didn't see a whole lot of that. It just wasn't going anywhere, doing anything.
Yeah.
And I felt my time was really wasted, you know, being on this ship. I was learning some electronics, but I didn't know if I'd continuing electronics or not. So I had quite a desire to get off of that carrier. It was heavy on regulation and not much fun. And home port of Quonset Point was just was not really the home port. Davisville, Rhode Island was, which was adjacent to Quonset Point, and Davisville was a CB parking lot. Nothing but bulldozers and heavy equipment in there. And we tied up at Davisville mostly, a long way from any base facilities such as a gym or a movie or anything like that. And not having a car, that wasn't very pleasant. So I never did like it much on the carrier for several reasons.
Heavy on regulations and light on the fun, huh?
Yeah.
I like that.
Pretty much it.
That was a good place to get away from. So when you did go the first time to Guantanamo, you flew to Guantanamo, right?
I think so.
Was that your very first airplane flight, or?
No, I had one when I was quite young. My grandparents took all the grandkids up on it was a tri-motor Ford. It was going around from small airport to small airport like we had close by, and all the grandkids got to ride on an airplane. And I was pretty young then.
Yeah, most of the time when the guys go in the military, they're on their first airplane flight. You had yours earlier. So how did you you figured out a way to get off that carrier?
Yes, I did. And the only way I could figure out how to get off of it was a volunteer for submarine duty. And that worked. I put in a request for submarine duty, and they got me off the carrier and sent me to sub school in New London, Connecticut. That school was about 2 months long, I think. And while I had been on the carrier, I had taught myself how to pitch softball, fast pitch softball. And at sub school, I was a pitcher for the instructors team. There was a lot of teams playing on that base at New London. And that was quite an advantage for me because I didn't have any duty. All I had to do was pitch softball for the instructors. And of course, I enjoyed the game quite a bit. And then during school, they asked where we all had to go to a submarine, where we like to go to for a home port. And there were several of them, several home ports that we could choose from. Norfolk, New London, Key West, Charleston, San Diego, Hawaii, and there might have been some more, I don't remember. But I chose the Pacific. I had never seen the Pacific Ocean, and I wanted to go to the Pacific. And I was really tired of New England winters.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a great chance I'd be standing some deck watches in the open if I stayed on the East Coast. So I requested San Diego, and I was assigned to a sub out of San Diego.
Hey, you couldn't beat San Diego for a duty station, could you?
Well, you could, yeah, but it was so much better than the East Coast. The weather was great.
Yeah.
There were things available there that I could afford.
Yeah.
And of course, by that time, I was getting submarine pay.
So you got an increase in pay for going on submarine, right?
Oh, yes.
Now, you mentioned that on the carrier, the regulations were heavy. Now, I would imagine they would be just as heavy on the sub. Is that?
Oh, no. You had to do your job, and everybody counted on you doing your job. And I don't know if anybody who was disciplined for not doing their job. For example, another fellow and I, we were sent to the naval station in San Diego to pick up a movie for that evening's entertainment and bring it back to the ship. Well, instead of coming directly back, we stopped by a bar and drank a bunch of beer, and it was obvious when we got back, I guess, where we had been. And our division officer called us aside and said we had a choice, either captain's mast or voluntarily stay aboard for, I don't know, several days or something. We were important, so that was a little bit of a hardship. And of course, we volunteered to stay aboard rather than go to captain's mast, and where it was hard telling what would happen.
What would you explain that a little bit? Captain's mast. What is
Yeah, it's a punishment. You go in front of the captain, your commanding officer, and you're charged with a certain offense, and he decides what the punishment will be, if any. And
You didn't want to go into that though.
well, I didn't want to take a chance that
Right.
I might get out of the captain's mast. 10 days or a couple weeks aboard wouldn't be bad, but I don't want a captain's mast in my record either.
Right. So you decided to stay on board for how many days this
I
punishment?
forget how many it was, maybe 10 or 12, something like that, while we were in port.
Did you ever have any problem, it being a submarine? Did you ever have any problem with the claustrophobia or anything?
No, not as most people recognize it. We had some problems that were kind of breathtaking, but not claustrophobia.
Everything's a real adjustment, I understand, aboard a sub. I mean, you just have to realize you're dealing with a lot smaller spaces.
Oh yeah, you got to be a lot more tolerant of people, and things are much more confined, and you hope that people be tolerant of you. Be considerate of other things, shipmates.
I'll go back to my timeline questions here, but you got to choose to go to San Diego, sub duty, and this was late 1953, or had you already been in more?
No, that'd been 54, I think.
Okay, so
I got
you'd
to
been
San
in
Diego.
well over a year when you went to.
Oh yeah.
Okay. So how long did you stay out in San Diego?
Well, I was on the perch. Home port was San Diego for about 2 years, I guess, until I got discharged.
2 years.
About that.
Okay. Did now when it left with the perch, you were on the perch, right? And the perch left port. You're
Yeah.
talking to an Army guy now.
Yeah.
Where did you? What would be typical time out to sea? How long would
Well,
it be?
for us, we were not the typical submarine. Most of our operations were with Navy UDT, underwater demolition teams. They're called SEALs now, and Marine recon units. And so we operate much differently than a normal attack submarine would. And we would make test raids at different U.S. bases that test their defenses. We'd send UDT or the Marines ashore to do what they did and retrieve them. And I guess a report would be written and state how good the defenses are of that particular base.
Were there ever any extended stays out to sea aboard your sub?
No, I wouldn't say so.
But short stays?
Well, I guess 3 or 4 weeks would be the longest for us.
So you didn't have to leave San Diego for too long a time, right?
No,
You'd mentioned playing softball, that you got to keep playing softball the whole time you were there?
well, not a whole lot in San Diego, because during that time we went to Pearl Harbor and operated out of there, with Marines and UDT. And we challenged every boat in Pearl Harbor to softball, loser by the beer. And we never lost a beer ball game.
Wow.
And then it got so that we couldn't find anybody to play for beer. The word spread that
Your reputation.
we were winners, I guess. So I pitched quite a bit for him. And
This
where
was fast pitch, right?
yeah, fast pitch, yeah. And then we went in the shipyard in Vallejo, California for overhaul, and we were there during the summer of, part of the summer of 55, or no, 56. And so we just stayed there in the shipyard, the boat did, and played on the base quite a bit then.
And you mentioned going to Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how long a trip was that from San Diego?
Well, traveling.
Time-wise?
Yeah, time-wise, as I recall, it was, I don't know, a week or 10 days, something like that, to go out there. I'm not sure of that.
That was a good, leave San Diego and go to Hawaii. That's a good trip right there.
Yeah.
If you could describe day-to-day life, if there's such a thing as a typical day aboard a sub, what would it be? How would you describe it,
Well,
if there is such a thing?
First of all, I was not on a typical sub. Typical subs don't carry Marines and UDT.
Okay.
And so a typical day
For you would have been,
would be checking out and calibrating electronics and standing watches on electronic equipment. But when I first went on, I stood deck watches as a lookout, up in the weather, with the seas breaking over the top of me, and that wasn't so great, but especially in the North Pacific in the winter. But I really like life a lot better on a sub than I did on a carrier. The camaraderie was quite improved for one thing, and the food was great as long as we didn't run out of things.
yeah. I was gonna ask you about the food. Was there always good food, and was there plenty of it?
Well, there's plenty of it, but sometimes you run out of the good stuff.
Okay.
You can only carry so much milk, you know, that kind of thing. But,
Any other supplies? I guess they were always plentiful. Anything you needed was there on board, right?
well, we tried to make it so, yeah, spare parts and that kind of thing. Clothing, what we need for a trip or whatever, yeah.
How did you keep up with reading a newspaper or listening to radio, or how did you keep up? You said that you were somewhat aware of things that were going on in Korea. How did you keep up with what was going on?
Well, that was mostly when I was on a carrier, and they had a newsletter of sorts, mimeograph type newspaper. On the sub, there wasn't much news because, well, during daylight hours, we usually were submerged, and at night we often surfaced, but I wasn't going to give up sleep for the news. So we didn't get a whole lot of it.
Yeah. How about information coming back from your family? Was there? I mean, were you able to receive mail and send a lot of mail, or?
Oh yeah, we could send and receive mail in port, of course.
Mhm.
That was no problem.
Okay. Any place that you docked that really stands out in your memory, from especially when when you were serving on the sub?
I guess Acapulco stands out as the best one. We had gone down to Panama with a load of Marines and UDT to test the operation, test the security on the canal. And we put those guys ashore and picked them up again, and at the end of that operation, I think everybody was ready for a vacation, and on the way back, we pulled into Acapulco and anchored out in the harbor. And, excuse me. And if we wanted to go ashore, we'd call over a water taxi, Mexican water taxi. We'd say, come over. And they come over, pick us up, take us ashore. and that was something new to us. They call them a taxi to get off the ship. But
How far out in the harbor did you have to?
it wasn't
Drop
far. I don't really know or remember. I suppose
I mean, you could get
mile
to
and a
shore.
half maybe.
On the taxi, you could be to shore in 10 minutes, 15
Yeah,
minutes?
something like that, I suppose. Sometimes we'd water ski ashore, put our clothes in the boat and water ski ashore. Yeah.
Water
That was-
ski.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun.
That's amazing. That's one I never heard before. I enjoyed that.
And
How did
of course, there were girls to be met in Acapulco. You know, a lot of guys are successful there, by their own estimation.
Yeah, and their own reporting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, would you dock a place like that?